Dawn broke with the kind of cold stillness that makes a person believe the world has already ended. In a makeshift prison camp car from jungle and ruin, a group of Japanese women huddled together, waiting for their final sunrise. They had been told nothing, but they understood everything. Footsteps the night before, whispers among guards, the sudden tightening of routine. It all pointed to the same brutal conclusion: execution at dawn. Yet none of them could imagine that the men approaching would not be executioners, but liberators bearing breakfast instead. This is the story of women forgotten by their own nation, captured during the chaotic final months of World War II. Nurses, clerks, farm girls turned auxiliary workers, drafted into service not by choice but by circumstance. Many believed their families had already assumed them dead. As the tide of war shifted and American forces advanced across the Pacific, these women became prisoners not through battle, but by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their identities were erased, their humanity dismissed, and their fate sealed in silence. For days, rumors had moved through the camp like restless wind. Some said the Americans executed all enemy prisoners. Others whispered that women would be spared but sold, abused, or experimented on. Fear built upon fear. With no official statement from their captors and no sign of repatriation, the women prepared their hearts for the worst. They spent their final night praying quietly, sharing memories of home, and clutching the scraps of keepsakes they had managed to hide: a hairpin, a torn photograph, a ribbon still scented faintly of sakura. What none of the women knew was that the American forces arriving that morning carried orders rooted not in revenge, but in humanity. The war was ending, and with it came a desperate push to reclaim dignity for themselves, for their enemies, and for a world fractured beyond recognition. To the soldiers assigned to the camp, these women were not enemies. They were victims of a war that devoured everyone in its path. Their mission was not execution, but evacuation, nourishment, and care. Private Thomas Carver, a 22-year-old farm boy from Kansas, led the group carrying crates of rations. He expected to find hostile fighters or hardened prisoners. Instead, he saw trembling young women, their faces pale with terror. Some clutched each other as if bracing for a final blow. Carver froze for a moment, struck by how fragile they looked. Not the fearsome enemy he had been warned about, but human beings in desperate need of compassion. "Ma'am, breakfast," he said softly, unsure if they understood. The translator stepped forward, announcing in hesitant Japanese that the war was ending and they were safe. But the women did not understand. Safety was a word that had lost meaning. One woman fainted from shock. Another sobbed uncontrollably, shaking her head in disbelief. The Americans, confused, glanced at one another, unable to comprehend why the prisoners seemed so terrified of a simple meal. It was only later, through the interpreter, that they learned about the women's belief that execution awaited them. Among the women was Yuki Nakamura, a former nurse who had spent the war tending to wounded soldiers regardless of nationality. Yuki had been captured while evacuating a field hospital. She had no family left, her parents killed in a firebombing raid, her younger brother missing in Manchuria. For her, execution had seemed almost merciful. When she saw the soldiers carrying food rather than weapons, her breath caught in her throat. Hope was something she had buried long ago. Now it rose painfully, like a phantom limb returning. The Americans set down boxes of eggs, canned fruit, and hardtack. The aroma of heating rations drifted through the camp, warm, unfamiliar, almost unreal. Of all things, it was the scent of scrambled eggs that broke the spell of fear. Many Japanese citizens during the war had never eaten eggs cooked in American style. The women stared as steam lifted into the morning air. Some covered their mouths, unable to believe that this could be real. Could this truly be their last morning, or their first step toward survival? Sergeant Miller, a gruff but kind-hearted veteran from Chicago, approached Yuki when he noticed she was trying to help steady another prisoner. Through gestures, he invited them to sit. Slowly, hesitantly, the women obeyed. "We ain't here to hurt you," he said, though he knew his words were just air to them. Still, something in his tone, gentle, almost fatherly, eased the tension. Yuki watched him carefully, analyzing every movement with the cautious skepticism of someone who had seen too much. The documentary footage, though grainy and aged, captures the moment the prisoners, finally reached for the food. Silent tears rolled down their cheeks as they tasted something warm for the first time in weeks. The Americans, uncertain how to behave around former enemies, simply stood nearby, offering shy smiles and nodding awkwardly. War had made them soldiers, but their upbringing had made them human. Helping hungry women felt far more natural than holding a rifle. For Yuki, the first bite of food brought back memories of her mother cooking in their small Tokyo apartment. She remembered laughter, festival nights, and the gentle reprimands her mother gave when she forgot to eat. All of it felt like a different lifetime. As she swallowed, she realized she was crying, not out of sadness or fear, but because she finally understood she was not going to die today. She was being given a chance to live, even if she didn't know what that life would look like now. One of the younger POWs, a timid girl named Hannah, approached Private Carver timidly and bowed. Carver, alarmed, nearly dropped his canteen. Bowing was foreign to him, but he understood gratitude when he saw it. He bowed back awkwardly, causing the other soldiers to chuckle. For the first time, the camp felt less like a prison and more like a fragile meeting point between two worlds, a place where war begrudgingly stepped aside to make room for compassion. Slowly, conversations began to flow through the interpreter. The Americans learned that many of the women had been conscripted into service against their will. Some were students, some were seamstresses. One had been a schoolteacher and still carried a chalk stub in her pocket. Their stories reshaped the soldiers' understanding of the enemy. These were not the fanatical warriors plastered across American propaganda posters. They were ordinary women thrust into extraordinary horrors. As the morning sun climbed higher, the soldiers started distributing clothing, blankets, and medical supplies. The women, still bewildered, accepted each item with expressions of cautious awe. Some had untreated wounds festering from weeks without care. Yuki instinctively stepped forward to assist the American medics. Without speaking the same language, she pointed out infections, stabilized bandages, and helped calm the more frightened girls. Her presence bridged a gap that neither side knew how to cross alone. The Americans watched her work with quiet admiration. Carver, especially, found himself struck by her calmness. War had hardened many of the soldiers, but seeing Yuki's gentleness sparked something forgotten, the understanding that healing could be just as powerful as fighting. He later wrote in a letter home, "I saw an enemy nurse today patching up prisoners we didn't even know how to help. Maybe we're all just people trying to survive something bigger than us." The women were then informed they would be relocated to a safer holding area where they could await repatriation. For them, the word repatriation carried complex emotions. Many had no homes to return to. Cities were rubble. Families gone. Futures uncertain. Yet even uncertainty felt like a blessing compared to the absolute finality they had expected when they woke that morning. Some wept openly, their bodies trembling from the release of fear. Transport trucks arrived that afternoon, and the women were assisted aboard. Some Americans helped lift them gently, as if handling fragile artifacts. When Hannah hesitated at the back of a truck, Carver offered his hand. She took it carefully, as though accepting a lifeline. Yuki climbed in last, giving a small bow to the medics she had worked beside. The soldiers returned the gesture, their clumsy bows sparking soft smiles among the prisoners. As the convoy rolled out, Yuki watched the landscape pass by, the shattered trees, burned fields, and abandoned huts. She wondered what peace would look like after so much destruction. Could a person rebuild a life from rubble? Could nations forgive each other? She didn't have the answers, but she felt something unexpected, a fragile, trembling sense of possibility. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a tomorrow she might actually reach. The relocation center, though still military in its structure, felt more humane. Beds, medical care, regular meals, and even supervised time outdoors. The women began to regain strength. Their bodies healed slower than their spirits, but both improved steadily. They formed soft friendships with the American nurses stationed there, trading small cultural lessons: how to tie a ribbon, how to fold a paper crane, how to say thank you in English. One day, Yuki taught an American medic how to write his name in Japanese. He, in turn, taught her how to pronounce freedom. She repeated it awkwardly at first, then with more confidence. The concept felt foreign, almost indulgent, but she cradled the word carefully in her heart. Freedom. A word she had never been encouraged to pursue. A word that now defined her reality. Several weeks passed before an official announcement came. Japan had formally surrendered. The war was truly over. The camp erupted in a mixture of relief and grief. Some women collapsed in tears, mourning family they knew they would never see again. Others celebrated quietly, clutching one another with a sense of profound release. Yuki stood still for a long moment, the news settling into her bones. Peace, she realized, would be just as painful as war, but far more necessary. The Americans brought radios into the common area, playing broadcasts about the world rebuilding. The women listened to voices they could barely understand, but they understood tone. Hope, rebuilding, repentance. Some learned English phrases from the broadcasts. Others began writing letters home, unsure if anyone would receive them. The idea of returning to a land forever changed by conflict filled them with both longing and fear. Carver, assigned to patrol the relocation center, often spoke with Yuki through the interpreter. Their conversations were simple: weather, food, the farm he hoped to return to. But there was something grounding in the exchange. For Yuki, speaking with him reminded her that the world could contain kindness even among former enemies. For Carver, Yuki represented the possibility that forgiveness could be real, not abstract. As the months passed, plans for repatriation solidified. The women would be transported back to Japan aboard hospital ships. The Americans prepared supplies and ensured each woman had clothes, medical records, and basic necessities. Though the journey home promised more uncertainty, it also promised closure. When Yuki learned she would soon leave, she felt a twinge of sadness, surprising, considering she had once feared these soldiers. On the day of departure, Carver approached Yuki with a small gift, a simple wooden charm he had carved during downtime. It resembled a tiny bird. "For freedom," he said through the interpreter. Yuki accepted it with both hands, bowing deeply. She wanted to say more, to express the gratitude that words could never hold, but all she managed was a soft, "Thank you." Carver nodded, understanding more in her tone than her words. When the women boarded the ship, many looked back at the American soldiers who had saved them from despair. The soldiers waved, some awkwardly, some with genuine emotion. The ship's horn echoed across the water as it began its slow departure. Yuki stood at the railing long after the figures on shore became indistinct shapes. She held the wooden bird tight in her palm, letting the sea wind whip through her hair. The journey back to Japan was quiet, contemplative. The women spent long hours looking out over the water, wondering what awaited them. Some feared rejection, that their families, shaped by wartime propaganda, would see them as tainted for having been prisoners. Others feared returning to ruins with no surviving relatives. Yuki feared both. Yet she also felt ready. Whatever home had become, she would face it. When the ship finally reached Yokohama, the sight broke their hearts. Entire districts reduced to ash. Buildings like skeletons. Streets warped by firebombing. The women disembarked into a country that no longer resembled the one they remembered. Still, there were people waiting, relief workers, nurses, volunteers. Some women collapsed into the arms of the strangers who welcomed them home. For the first time, they realized they were survivors, not ghosts. Yuki found temporary housing in a women's refuge center. She began tending to wounded civilians, using her medical skills to help rebuild shattered communities. She treated malnourished children, elderly survivors, and even former soldiers. She worked tirelessly, often late into the night. Helping others allowed her to reclaim her purpose. Her trauma did not disappear, but it softened each time someone thanked her, each time she saved a life. Months later, a letter arrived from America. Yuki recognized the handwriting immediately, Carver's. He wrote about returning to his family farm, about how the wheat fields had finally started to grow again. He hoped she was safe, hoped the world was being kinder to her now. Yuki held the letter close, feeling warmth spread through her chest. The war had separated nations, but compassion had built a fragile bridge between two former enemies. Years passed, and Japan transformed from a country clawing its way out of ruin to one rebuilding its identity. Yuki became a midwife, helping deliver the first generation born after the war. Each newborn she held reminded her of the mourning she thought would be her last. She never forgot the fear that once consumed her, or the unexpected kindness that saved her. She kept Carver's wooden bird on a small shelf beside her bed. Whenever the world felt heavy, she would hold it and remember that even in humanity's darkest chapters, light could find a way in. She never saw Carver again, but they exchanged letters for decades. Their correspondence became a testament not to romance, but to the quiet resilience of shared humanity. History books rarely mention the forgotten prisoners, the unnamed women who survived war not through combat, but through endurance. Their stories are footnotes, if they appear at all. Yet their experiences reveal something essential about war, that suffering is not limited to battlefield lines, and that salvation often comes from the most unexpected places. Yuki's story, though just one among many, symbolizes the fragile but powerful threads that connect even opposing sides. Today, surviving records, letters, diaries, fragments of testimony reveal how deeply those women were affected by the act of mercy they received. A meal, offered at a moment they believed would be their last, became the turning point between life and death. For the American soldiers, it was simply breakfast. For the prisoners, it was salvation. That morning stands as one of countless quiet acts of humanity that rarely make headlines but shape lives forever. And so this story endures. Japanese women, POWs, bracing for execution at dawn, greeted instead by American soldiers carrying breakfast and compassion. A reminder that even in times of devastation, mercy can rewrite fate. A reminder that war does not erase humanity, it merely buries it. And sometimes, all it takes is a single morning, a shared meal, and a gesture of unexpected kindness to bring it back to the surface. Thanks for watching.